Putin might decide to launch a nuclear strike on the front.
The F-16s, which are apparently now flying in Ukrainian skies, will be considered targets.
Leaders are afraid of underestimating Putin once again.
But with the nuclear thing, this is another bluff.
France is ready to send French troops to Ukraine.
Everything has to be mobilized to make sure that Russia doesn't win this war.
Hi, my name is Alina Hrytsenko. I am an international relations analyst, and this is Talking Substance. Today we have a very special guest, Michael Bociurkiw, who is a global affairs analyst, Atlantic Council contributor.
Senior fellow,
CNN contributor, who has an extreme experience in working also for international organizations like OSCE, some of the UN, like UNICEF, WHO. So today we're going to discuss different trends and developments happening in Europe. You also have your own podcast, as far as I remember.
I do, Global Impact. Yep.
Yes, and you have this motto of connecting global dots, so you don't have to.
Exactly. Yeah, I do that with my co-host, Melissa Ritchie, and we've now, she actually pushed us to do it. It's a vodcast now, so it's more video than audio, although both streams are put out. So, yeah, and speaking of which, by the way, I did work for WHO, it's true. Are you up to date on your vaccinations? I'm just kidding.
So this is what I believe we're going to do today. So connecting different dots. Yeah, and geopolitical dots happening precisely in Europe. Starting with discussing Putin's inauguration, or rather, I would say, coronation, and all this theatrical performance ended up in church with all this anointment of the Tsar, with priests and stuff like that. So it gave me that kind of vibe. So that was more of a coronation. On the one hand, and at the same time that it was sort of a daily routine for Putin. So with all the guards on horses and all this Kremlin in golden, walls and things like that. But the question now is here, what can we expect from him, from Putin, taking into account the fact that Russia, just like a couple of days before the inauguration, launched military drills trying to work on the tactical nuclear weapons.
Right.
So what expectations do you have personally as a global affair?
Yeah, and by the way, they said that the F-16s, which are apparently now flying in Ukrainian skies, will be considered targets. Fair game for tactical nuclear. I mean, this is just crazy. But yeah, a lot of theatrics, and we've become so used to seeing him march up that aisle unopposed. You have to remember that in the time he's been in power, there's been a few men through the Oval Office in Washington, and quite a few men and women through 10 Downing Street in London. That's how long he's been in power. This is
25 years, quarter century. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, I mean, but the scary thing too is that if publications like The Economist are to believe, we're heading towards a world where there are going to be more autocracies than liberal democracies. And trust me, they follow each other, but they also signal. They have this habit of signaling what they're going to do in advance. But with Putin, I think he's obsessed with power. It's gone to his head. It's probably a situation he has a circle around him, tight circle around him, where perhaps a lot of people don't even give him the truth of what's happening. For example, losses on the battlefield. But he's showing no sign of relenting. In fact, I think he's showing signs of even going harder on Ukraine. We have to believe in his words that he wants to recreate the former Soviet Union. He will not stop at the borders of Ukraine. He will go towards the Baltics and possibly towards Poland as well. So I don't know where that all leaves Ukraine in the bigger picture, but not a very good scenario. But my father, Bociurkiw, he was a political science professor, quite well known, and he used to watch very carefully these inaugurations because there was that balcony at the Kremlin, and he would say, whoever is surrounding the current leader, well, one of them will be the next leader. But with Putin, there's no balcony, there's no men around him who might take over. So That is a flaw, I think, in any leader. If you don't groom successors, then when you go, and you could go at any moment, there's no one to bring that continuity.
Yeah, exactly. This is one of the problems, I believe. Putin is like 71 years old.
Yeah.
So his fifth term currently, which is currently begun, is gonna bring him to 77 years old, I believe. So 6 years, 2030. This is incredible time frame. And the fact that he doesn't have a successor makes me feel personally a little bit uncomfortable. At the same time, I suppose that he does have a successor, only this person is not quite public. This is the way of protecting the person from a potential assassination. I do not know. This is conspirology coming here.
You never know. It was really interesting, too. The later part of the ceremony, he shook hands with these various military leaders, and I noticed two of them didn't salute him. So I wonder if they're going to be on their way to the gulag soon. That's the trademark of Putin. If you're show any signs of competition or falling out of line, he will take away your business empire. He'll send you to the gulag, or even worse. So there's this unwritten deal, of course, with business leaders in Russia, that if they fall afoul of Mr. Putin, that is it for them. You either put up with what he tells you, or you become a critic, face possible deportation to the gulag or execution, or flee abroad. So
I remember that not a couple of years ago, but like a decade ago, people were talking about Mr. Surkov as his successor, who actually took a pseudonym, I believe, and wrote a couple of books where he described future Russia in a metaphoric way, and Putin's successor. But it seems like, well, no longer Mr. Surkov. We can rely on him as a successor.
I don't know. Maybe he has a female in mind. Maybe one of his mistresses. Who knows? Stranger things have happened, in autocracies.
And at the same time, this military news about those military drills and potential tactical nuclear weapon strikes, which it's been a discussion like for quite several months now, that Putin might decide to launch a nuclear strike on the front, or perhaps somewhere in the Black Sea, just to demonstrate that he's capable of doing that. He's ready to cross the line. And at the same time, we have the French president, Emmanuel Macron, who is stating that there will be a cross line, and that France is pretty much getting ready for a potential nuclear war with Russia, and that France is ready to send French troops to Ukraine once Russia crosses the red line. And at the same time, we do understand that using of nuclear weapon, it is a red line, but there are some others. And nobody really talks about what kind of red lines.
Right. Well, that's the big problem we have, is no one really knows what the red lines are, because the people like Mr. Putin, like Mr. Assad in Syria, have been allowed to cross these red lines with impunity. I've lost count of how many red lines have already been crossed in this war. But I think on the use of tactical nuclear weapons. And remember, these weapons, tactical nuclear, are used in a very confined area.
Right.
So they're not widespread. But I think in the drive up here from Odessa, I was thinking, my big fear is that they're going to be doing something foolish or stupid with the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant that is in their hands. And we all remember Chernobyl in 1986. Right. That was apparently an accident on a trial. It really keeps me awake at night to know that is in their hands. But with the nuclear thing, this is another bluff. Mr. Putin knows the spine of Mr. Macron and of other European leaders, and that they actually fall for this. It scares them. So that's why there's not the amount of deterrence that one expects. And look, I've been based for quite some time on the Black Sea. I walk by the port every day. And, when there were almost no ships coming in and out of there, I just shook my head in disbelief. I mean, Odessa, the port, is a crucial component of the global food supply chain. Why is it that these small group of men in the Kremlin are allowed to dictate what someone in Ethiopia or Eritrea eats at night, or in Egypt, or the price we pay for bread and grain at the checkout counter in the United States? So I really wish that the West would see it for what it is and put at least part of the muscle they've deployed to the Red Sea and to the Black Sea to protect these really, really critical maritime lanes. Now, I know I'm not directly answering the question, but having said that, there is good news out of Odessa I have to bring to you, is that, you got to chalk one up for the Ukrainians. Without a navy, they've been able to do a lot to reopen the Black Sea, push the Russian Black Sea fleet back. But for the first time in the past few days, we've seen containers piling up at the port, getting ready to be moved out. So not only have they opened up the sea lanes for agricultural products, but now for containers. So that is a really good news for Ukraine. As for the French, actually, I've had more than one of my neighbors come up to me on Odessa and say, are there really French troops here? I say, well, maybe there is some volunteering, but I don't think officially. But, I think this is the way I salute Mr. Macron for saying that, and for perhaps pushing other European leaders to say and plan for the same thing. Because if they don't, I believe that, like I said earlier, Mr. Putin will test their will even further and go beyond Ukraine.
Do you remember a couple of months ago when Macron, he gave an interview in the French television, and he said that for the first time that he was ready to send the troops. Right immediately, like a couple of hours later, we have received this piece of news that the French troops were already in Romania, ready to come to Ukraine. Do you think was that like information campaign to test Putin's reaction, and what would he do potentially if that was for real? Because we found out later that that was a fake.
Hard to say. I think Macron is a little bit into PR stunts.
Right.
When he was going to the Kremlin to meet with Putin at that long table, remember, quite a long time ago, and it didn't achieve very much. We also have to remember that Mr. Macron is trying to be the new leader of Europe. Angela Merkel is gone.
Exactly.
They need a big boss in the room, and he's trying to be it. But I don't think he has what it takes, with all due respect to my French friends.
Why so?
I just don't think the spine is there.
It just gives the vibe, especially after this meeting with Xi Jinping.
Yeah.
It gives the vibe that Xi Jinping accepts Macron as the European leader, like one and only, unlike Ursula von der Leyen.
Yeah.
And Macron is ready to accept this role.
Yeah, of course he's ready to accept that role.
In this Napoleonic vibe.
Yeah, but look, the Chinese are infamous at manipulating Western leaders. They're very good at it. He probably doesn't know what's coming. And, if he wants to play in the same sandbox as China, he's going to have to give a lot of concessions because that's the way they play. So I don't know if he... Look how many Western leaders got screwed when they went to China during COVID to try and, work out some kind of a better agreement with them and bring this closer to an end. So I don't think he's got what it takes, quite honestly.
So you think that Macron doesn't have a spine?
I don't think so. And most French people I talk to agree with me on that one. But, he has been in power for quite some time.
Right.
There's a lot of, as you well know, there's a lot of nuances in diplomacy. And I remember when, this seems like an eternity ago now, but when that first summit happened at the Élysée Palace with Macron, Putin, and Zelensky, I was there covering it. I provided commentary for Bloomberg and others. And I remember when Putin pulled up in this obscene motorcade, Macron gave him a big hug. But when...
that was back then.
Yeah, but when Zelensky pulled up in the embassy car, this, probably used vehicle or whatever, just a handshake, maybe pat on the back, and that was about it. So... you got to watch the little vibes in diplomacy as well. I don't know what he was thinking back then, but a lot of them underestimated Mr. Putin.
Yes.
And there shouldn't have been any surprise that he came in and, launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Yeah,
well, people underestimated his obsession with Ukraine and this reestablishing not the Soviet Union, but perhaps Russian Empire, I believe. Right. And at the same time, Macron is giving like this harsh rhetorics towards Putin, but at the same time, there's the French ambassador who is being invited to Putin's coronation. Right. So I believe there is some miscommunication probably happening here, or what is like a double game or something?
A double game. French trying to play both sides. Like, maybe we'll show some respect or diplomatic protocol to Mr. Putin, but on the other hand, Macron won't show up. I think that was unfortunate. I think it sends out the wrong signals to the Kremlin as well. But look. It's an interesting time to be alive. Just the other day, the British kicked out senior Russian diplomats, closed down some of their diplomatic properties. Why? Because they caught them red-handed. And it was a signal that if you're going to try and pull that kind of crap on our soil, we're going to retaliate. I mean, this was the top military guy in the United Kingdom for the Russians. And they also closed down a couple of properties as well. So I hope the French are looking as closely at what the Russians are doing there, nefarious activities, and I hope they keep them in check as well. But look, the other thing is the realities of the economies and of I guess the reality is for Western leaders they have to face election cycles every few years, right? Right. So look what's happened in Poland with the farmers and the long extent they've been able to blockade Ukraine's border crossings. So in France, you have a lot of dairy farmers. There are a lot of cows there, and they've been pining, I think, for a long time to get their products back into the Russian market big time. So that puts pressure on leaders as well. We have to remember domestic kind of political realities.
Yeah, so you mentioned this espionage thing about Russian military intelligence officer, I believe, who worked as a defense attaché at the embassy. So it feels like Russians are still, flooding Russian agents and spies, flooding Europe, working all over different countries.
And by the way, this was actually an arson attack on a Ukrainian-related business or humanitarian installation, something like that. So it was, directed towards Ukraine, and they caught them. So that's quite interesting. Good for them.
Yeah, but it's understandable that it's not just like Russian spying in Europe, but also Russians are successful in recruiting the locals. I believe there's trials happening in Germany currently in Bundeswehr. Trials, like there's a Bundeswehr officer suspected on spying for the Russians. So like it gives me that KGB vibe. Russians are still successful in their spying.
Look, that happens everywhere. The Chinese they were using LinkedIn.
French defense.
But they were using LinkedIn to recruit Silicon Valley scientists, and they successfully did it. So, look, we're in an era of new technology, borderless world. There's spying going on all the time. It's only whether you're going to get caught or not, but it is becoming more sophisticated. What I'm more worried about is the Russian disinformation campaigns, the meddling in elections, the spreading really of the fake news is really at a new height. And it's way beyond the resources they commit to it in terms of money and people and technology is way beyond what the West and NATO and others are deploying. So that's something that the West has to get a grip on as well and push back on.
Yeah, but going back to this news about trials of Bundeswehr officer, doesn't it mean that, like, taking exactly this case, particularly Bundeswehr is weak or vulnerable towards Russia?
I'm not as familiar as I should be with that particular one, so I don't want to comment too much. But I think overall, looking at Europe, I don't think the fences, so to speak, are high enough to prevent this sort of thing from happening. And it relates to what I said just now about their fake news and disinformation campaigns, is that I think the West really underestimates their capabilities, and they're capable of doing a lot of harm.
Yeah, Mr. Pistorius, actually, they're currently trying to make this reform of Bundeswehr, getting them ready to full-scale war ready. Yeah, as far as I remember, Mr. Pistorius said full war ready, and cybersecurity is one of their biggest aspirations. This is what they want to do with this reform. Yeah. It is also interesting. Isn't it a kind of competition happening between Germany and France currently, both on this political level between, like, personally the leaders, President Macron and Chancellor Scholz, as well as in the military So is there a trend probably that we're going to observe anytime soon of this competition?
I think
growing up the military power.
There is definitely competition politically between Paris and Berlin. It's been there for a long time. But I think both countries, their economies are going under quite a bit of strain, and also shifting political sands as well. So, a lot of Western governments, actually including my own in Canada, are in a coalition type of arrangement where they're very, very vulnerable. And then also you have the appearance of right-wing parties that are getting more power. You have the appearance of complete idiots like Marjorie Taylor Greene in the United States, who just are puppets, I think, of the United States, and parroting their lines and putting forth just complete rubbish about Ukraine, about Zelensky, that sort of thing. I don't know what accounts for the rise of these types of people, but they seem to have an outsized kind of megaphone to spew this stuff. And, sorry to say is that, we have MSNBC and CNN that really give these types a hard time, as they rightly should. But all of us, trust me, have well-educated friends who actually fall for it. And I've gone to the United States, and I have my well-educated friends asking me, what are these allegations about Zelensky, that he's a corrupt, he's in child trafficking, that there's so much corruption and our taxpayers' money is going down the drain. That is happening a lot, and that worries me.
Right. So it seems like countries are rearming, strengthening their defense capabilities. It feels like countries are getting full-scale war with Russia potential. It's like the countries are afraid, and leaders are afraid of underestimating Putin once again, which is why all this kind of reforming of Bundeswehr, for example, happening. This is what's this Macron's rhetoric about a nuclear war about. There's also a question about international organizations. You have an extensive experience working for.
Yep.
So those organizations like United Nations that are supposed to work on peace establishing, peace building, peacekeeping. So why are they keep failing?
I could probably write a book about that. In fact, I do have a book proposal on the table already about the UN, but specifically UNICEF. Look, a lot of the UN agencies did not expect Mr. Putin to try and, take over Ukraine. A lot of them were caught flat-footed.
Black swans happen.
Yeah, they do. UNICEF, World Food Program, WHO. And it really, really upsets me as a former staff member of the organization that it took weeks and weeks and weeks for heads of UN agencies after the war started to mention the R word, to mention Russia is the aggressor. And I actually called the head of WHO out during a press conference, a live press conference, and I said, you see what's happening. You see maternity hospitals being bombed. You see children being killed. Why aren't you calling out Russia? They would not use that word. Shortly afterwards, they did. I'm not going to take credit for it. But it was that, as well as not prepositioning staff and resources, food, vaccines, that type of thing. That was a complete failure and an embarrassment. The other problem we have, and I know this from being very, very deep in the inside, is that a lot of these organizations have a very low barrier for security. What I mean by that, for example, right now, I see hardly any international staff members in Odessa right now because they feel it's not safe. Well, excuse me, but I've been walking around there for quite some time, and I think it's probably safer than a lot of other Ukrainian cities. And, a presence is needed there because we get a lot of internally displaced people coming from Kherson and region, those types of areas. So in terms of peace, I was recently in Ottawa at that UN Plastic Summit, and it just reminded me of where Russia sits in this whole kind of ecosystem of UN diplomacy. They were sitting there, taking the microphone quite a bit, as if, we're the most peace-loving people on earth. We're the biggest environmentalists on the planet. And they took a lot of time trying to dictate what the conversation would be. And then in the background, what they do is they strong-arm their buddies, like the Eritreas of the world or whatever, to vote with them. And talking to Ukrainian diplomats at the UN permanent mission in New York, they go, yeah, no surprise. That's what happens all the time. Mm-hmm. And especially when it comes to votes that concern Ukraine as well. The other kind of dynamic there in the UN, in the UNGA, and a lot of these meetings is that Ukraine is very, very poorly resourced. Mm-hmm. So you'll have I think there was only one Ukrainian diplomat who came to Ottawa. He was only there for a day or two. Whereas the Russians are there the entire time with a big delegation, mm-hmm. and again, able to, kind of take the microphone too much and try and sway things in there. Mm-hmm. Look, in that particular instance, Russia is an oil producer.
Right.
So they were trying to shift the conversation from, renewables, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. lack of, getting away from plastics to, no, let's focus more on waste management. Okay. We'll still do plastics, but we can get rid of it easily. So yeah, that's what's happening.
Okay. And what about OSCE? Because it feels like, it actually felt even 10 years ago when the war actually outbroke, starting with the eastern part, with the annexation of Crimea, the eastern part of Ukraine.
10 years ago.
Yeah, it's been 10 years. It always felt like there is something wrong with OSCE, The organization that is supposed to work for peace in Europe still shaking hands with the Russians, basically on the battlefield. We'll remember that small films and clips. The security architecture is changing, of course. So there is a strong need for a new, stronger OSCE, different OSCE. Yeah. So what do you think, what actually can be changed about OSCE to make it workable and effective and efficient?
Well, it's the same problem really as the UN Security Council. It's every member state has a veto power in effect.
And there are China and Russia who's going to veto everything basically.
Yeah, so 57 member states in the OSCE. And it was Russia that brought an end to the special monitoring mission here in Ukraine because they didn't vote for more resources to come in. Mm-hmm. And they also, in the process, killed the program office here that does very good work in many countries about, building democratic institutions, that sort of thing. The one thing the OSCE does really, really well, kind of sets the gold standard, is election observations. Mm-hmm. They do that really, really well. They're headquartered in Warsaw. Their acronym is ODIHR, and they're really important. They even go to the United States and give them a hard time if they see irregularities. But with Russia, as long as Russia and its kind of buddy states are part of the OSCE, it's not going to function properly. Mm-hmm. But so
it has to be a new organization without Russia.
Exactly, or get rid of the veto power, and maybe that will work better. There are a lot of good people there. It does something the UN doesn't really do, like after I think it's 10 years, you're out. So that allows for, circulation of fresh blood into the organization, things like that. And also you have a rotating chair. So when I joined the OSCE, Switzerland was the chair for a year, and they're very, very good. Bit overly cautious, if you ask me, but we really enjoyed working with them. And 10 years, I'll remind everyone too that, in a couple of months' time, we'll be at the 10-year anniversary of the Russian downing of MH17, which was done by the Russians, no doubt about that. So that's going to be a sad day because a lot of families are still waiting for justice on that one.
Right, and which was done on purpose?
I happen to think that they were targeting something in the air if they, by mistake, targeted a passenger airliner because it has a very particular signature. It has a particular speed. It was complete idiocy for...
I'm not a military expert, but I do understand that there has to be some difference,
Absolutely. Yeah, but what was happening just quickly in the background there were the Russian thugs on the ground in Donetsk felt that the Ukrainians were getting air superiority, so they called Moscow and said, hey, can you send us a big gun? which was the Buk missile launcher. So they did. They tried to hide it, but it was found out. But that thing, went up, and it can go at very high altitude, and it brought that plane down. 298 crew and passengers on their way from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur. The Dutch took over the investigation, and it went to trial, and 3 gentlemen were eventually charged and convicted, 2 Russian nationals and 1 Ukrainian, but they're both in Russian-controlled territory or in Russia. Now, a lot of people ask me, do you think these guys will ever face a day in jail? I think what tends to happen is people get a bit careless after a while. They go, oh man, I've been stuck in Russia for so long. I'm thinking of, beach time in the Maldives. And what they'll do is transit through some country that is a signatory, and then they'll get nabbed. So let's hope that happens. But Russia has made it clear they're not going to give these men up voluntarily.
Yeah, actually, thinking about new peace organization in Europe leads me to the thought about, again, Emmanuel Macron. I can't get rid of him. Emmanuel Macron's ambitions to create a European army, something that will be independent from NATO. Yeah. So could it be, from your perspective, could it be the case that, like, with Macron and Xi Jinping exactly, seeing all these trips of Macron's to Beijing last year, all this Chinese tea ceremony, while Ursula von der Leyen was left somewhere behind, which was done on purpose, I believe.
And lovely gifts from France too. I think expensive cognac to Xi Jinping, things like that. How wonderful.
Which has its own meaning because of this cognac, the economic trade developments happening currently. And also...
reading between the tea leaves, I see.
Right. And also this recent meeting of Xi Jinping and Macron, again, no ties. Yeah, so just in Macron's French restaurant, quite informal, no protocol at all. So it felt like old friends just chatting about current geopolitical developments. So it just gave me this understanding and conclusion that Xi Jinping is trying to cut transatlantic ties between the US and Europe. Feels like it's going to be advantageous for China if Europe promotes itself as a sovereign, independent actor of international relations, and France as a leader. So, and Xi Jinping, it seems to me, is going to definitely support Macron's ambitions of a European army. So, thinking of that, if we just ponder on a solid European army, which is not going to double the functions of NATO, could Macron perhaps initiate such a peacekeeping, peace-building organization, a new organization for Europe?
Possibly. I'm not a military expert, but I will tell you that
and what is going to be to make it effective and efficient working on peace in Europe?
First of all, in terms of China being here and coming to France and everything, they've been trying very hard to, you're right, cut the transatlantic ties or water them down, however you want to put it. They appointed a so-called peace envoy, don't forget, to try and bring an end to the war in Ukraine. And also,
you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. But also we see the emergence of Saudi Arabia, for example, playing a bigger role diplomatically in the region. So a lot of shifting sands that make it even more difficult to connect the dots so other people don't have to. But I think in terms of Europe, the problem there with whether we're talking about strengthening NATO or creating a new military force on the continent is that I'm not so sure the political will is there to devote all that money. Look at the problems they've been facing, getting things like ammunition to Ukraine and tanks and things like that. I don't know. I wonder about this, but whether, at the end of the day, the leaders have to think of what the electorate wants. Otherwise, they're not going to be voted back into power.
There will also be a chance to integrate Ukraine in this new security architecture.
Yeah, but is there do voters have the stomach to see more of their taxpayers' money going towards military means? I'm not so sure because I was on a panel about a year and a half ago in London, and one of the speakers, I think it was Victor Mallard of the FT, said, you know, people have to get it in their heads that we're on a war footing. You have to have a wartime economy. Everything has to be mobilized to make sure that Russia doesn't win this war. But I don't think that's happened. I mean, European leaders are sending out more signals that people have to be aware that things aren't going to be the same as before. But there are a lot of other problems, rising crime, questions about immigration, things like that, people not being able to afford roofs over their heads that make it difficult for, I think, European leaders to focus very much on that particular direction.
Like, it feels like hard times we're living in. The countries are getting ready for war. People cannot afford groceries and...
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada is in such a bind because, you know, he's under a lot of pressure and God forbid Trump gets in, a lot of pressure to devote more of the GDP to the military spending. But
it's the world trend.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But he has other priorities that have been forced on him or of his own making. So we'll leave it at that about Canada.
Okay. I believe we have connected enough dots for today. So this was Talking Substance. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Bociurkiw.
My pleasure. This was really fun.
Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.